Good afternoon, and thank you for joining CSG's webinar series. Today's event, the U.S. Nuclear Industry, a Year After Fukushima, features two policy experts from the Nuclear Energy Institute who will update state policymakers and agency staff on the steps the nuclear industry is taking to ensure that our domestic reactors can respond to events that may challenge safe operation. In addition, they will also provide an outlook on nuclear power, discuss the current status of nuclear-related policies in the United States, provide an update on the status of moving nuclear waste to volunteer storage sites. Before we get started, I wanted to give all our participants just some logistics for today's call. Our panelists are going to take questions after each presentation, but we will have to limit those questions at about the half-hour mark if we have several, just so we can get through both presentations and keep the event under the scheduled 1 hour. If you've got additional questions, feel free to send them in, and we will certainly get them to our panelists and get you connected with them so you can get answers to them. Also want to remind you that you're in listen-only mode, but you can send in your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll queue them up in order as we get them. And we'll be in order of reception, but anything you have left over, again, we will get to our panelists so they can get in touch with you to answer your questions. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our first panelist, Joe Pollock. He's an executive director at NEI, and he served as before joining NEI, he served as an executive at Entergy, most recently as the site vice president of Indian Point Energy Center in New York from 2007 to 2011. In that position, Pollock was responsible for overall operations of Indian Point Energy Center's 2 operating reactors and the maintenance of 1 decommissioned reactor. Before joining Entergy, Pollock spent more than 35 years in the nuclear energy industry, including at the Calvert Cliffs Nuclear Energy Facility in Maryland, a Salem Generating Station in New Jersey, and the D.C. Cook Nuclear Station in Michigan. He holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from Glassboro State College, a senior reactor operating certificate, and a graduate degree from Columbia University, and he's completed the Institute of Nuclear Power Senior Operator Nuclear Plant Management course. Our second panelist is Marshall Cohen. He has over 35 years of experience in public affairs, issues management, and government relations, ranging with a particular focus and record of success in working with communities in the public policy process. Most recently, he was a key part of the successful new nuclear facility licensing and public outreach program for the National Enrichment Facility being built in New Mexico, an important milestone development for the United States nuclear energy industry. He's a graduate of the University of California and served as a member of the Maine State Board of Education and on numerous energy and public policy commissions and boards. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our first panelist, Joe Pollock. Joe?
Well, good afternoon. Thank you. I'm here today to provide an update on the events and the cleanup at the Fukushima Daiichi site in Japan, as well as I'll be sharing important information about the action the U.S. industry has taken since those events. These actions have enhanced our existing planning and procedures to ensure safety in and around 104 nuclear energy facilities in the United States. The nuclear energy industry primary and constant goal is to make safe nuclear energy facilities even safer. A long-standing commitment to safety and continuous learning is reflected in the operational focus and safety culture at our facilities. And again, safety is the foundation of a thriving nuclear energy industry in the America and globally. Next slide. I will not be talking to each one of these points, but in general, I'll be following through that. So if you want to go to the next slide also. The U.S. companies began procurement almost immediately following the events in Japan and have continued to add backup equipment to our installed emergency backup equipment. This layered approach has given us the defense in depth that is enable us, we believe, to be in a position to respond to the unknown events that could occur, and I'll discuss that further. And then lastly, I'll discuss the recommendations from the NRC and our response to those recommendations. Next slide. As everyone's aware of by now, is that last year a massive earthquake and a series of tsunamis struck the facility in Japan. We now know that the tsunami, not the earthquake, and subsequent flooding led to the loss of all AC power and the ability to provide cooling water to the units. Many of our experts and member companies shared resources, equipment, technology, and industry knowledge with the team at the impacted site in Japan. And in fact, American technology has been installed in the Fukushima Daiichi plant to help decontaminate the water that is being used to cool the uranium fuel. Robotic devices have been provided to help with debris cleanup, and additional decontamination strategies and practices are being planned. And radiation shielding material to keep the plant work has been provided from the U.S. The units in the spent fuel pools are in a safe conditions. Inspections to date revealed that the fuel had remained covered in the fuel pool without damage, and as you may remember that back when this first happened, we were unsure of that issue, and a massive effort was taken to add additional water to the fuel pools, which subsequently we now know that they were covered. And short of debris falling on top of the spent fuel, there was no damage to the fuel that's been examined to date. Next slide. I want to talk about the U.S. response, the most important safety objectives, and how we added additional layers to safety U.S. reactors over the last 40 years to try to set the stage on how we want and responded to the events in Japan. Our industry is adept at analyzing and incorporating lessons learned and being self-critical. In the 70s, the formation of the NRC itself, which separated from the Atomic Energy Commission, was the first and the foresight that the U.S. had to have a strong regulator. In the 80s, post-3 Mile Island created the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations to share information with the industry. It enhanced the importance of EP planning and communications. It created the National Academy of Nuclear Training, which was required for all our senior reactor operators to run the facilities to complete and successfully pass NRC examinations. And then in the 80s and 90s, we continued with technical learnings. In fact, we included hardened vents in our Mark I facilities. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But we also improved the station blackout regulations, including emergency diesel generators as a result of the Browns Ferry fire. In the 90s, we continued on learning from the post-Chernobyl, where we developed severe accident management guidelines were created. These guidelines were created for an accident that we said couldn't happen, but what happened if it did? And then in 2000, post 9/11, we responded and positioned ourselves in the event that we had a large area impact either from a plane or some other event, and how would we respond if in-plant equipment was destroyed. And that led to the procurement and development of procedures and approaches to use pumps, generators, and other equipment that's stored off-site or away from the site facility to be able to respond to that type of event. And then even most recently, before Japan, with the BP oil spill in 2010, we drafted an agreement document on sharing between the industry in the event of a nuclear event at any site that could take place. And in fact, we used that draft document in response to Japan's event. When the events in Japan took place, we already had a structure in place to learn and validate. First, we ran tests on similar units in the U.S. We conducted additional training. We verified our emergency equipment status. We verified our communications, worked with the local emergency response organizations to discuss how we would respond to this type of event, and we changed our emergency response procedures. We have reviewed our plans and concluded we are well prepared for natural events. We have operated safely through severe hurricanes such as Andrew and Katrina, and in 2011 alone, the industry operated safely shut down through record snowfalls in the Northeast, tornadoes at Browns Ferry in Alabama and Surrey Station in Virginia, floods at Fort Calhoun and Cooper Station in Nebraska, an earthquake near the North Anna Station, and was felt at numerous other stations in the Northeast and as far west as Michigan, and Hurricane Irene that impacted over dozens of stations along the East Coast, including record rainfalls. Over the last year, INPO collected data with the cooperation of TEPCO, the utility, to provide a technical analysis with a detailed timeline that was issued last fall. This report had an actual timeline of the plant response. We recognize it would be easy for us to reach a conclusion that we were okay and that U.S. plants were unlikely to see a tsunami. We have handled natural events. And in fact, in over 3,500 reactor years of service in the U.S., there has only been one loss of all AC power, and that lasted 37 minutes. But that would not be acceptable conclusion, because it did happen in Japan. In addressing the lessons learned from the Fukushima, the companies that operate American reactors have identified those actions that provide the greatest safety benefits, and we are implementing them first. We are taking actions now, well before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had required the specific actions in the Tier 1 recommendations. All the companies that operate American reactors are aligned with the near-term priorities for the post-Fukushima safety enhancements as recommended by the NRC. The industry has experts and analytical tools and regulations in place that allow us to identify where and how we obtain the greatest safety benefit with steps that we are making at our facilities. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about Flex strategy. So in the U.S., we are expanding our capabilities for our response to 9/11 with an additional layer of protection for backups to our backups or a layer approach. We assume we will lose all AC power and the ability to pump water to cool the reactors. Early on in the post-event analysis from Japan, it was recognized that a single event had affected multiple units, that they had lost all AC power, and they have lost the ultimate heat sink or the ability to pump water to cool the reactor. So we wanted to provide a method to cool the reactor, provide makeup to the spent fuel pool in the reactor, and protect the containment. It will be specific to each site and is designed to prevent fuel damage. It will support implementing actions during an event, first by using the installed plant equipment and the installed backup equipment, and then secondly by using the on-site stage equipment that we refer to as Flex to respond to the event, and then by use of regional support centers. So some details of the Flex approach, which provides added safety and response capabilities to respond to extreme natural events, regardless of their type, magnitude, or number. The strategy uses pre-staged portable equipment to provide another layer of protection for power and cooling capabilities for the reactor and spent fuel pool. It will also provide power for critical instrumentation at the facility. One of the benefits of this approach is that the equipment can be used to supplement safety equipment built into the plant and other layers of backup protection, regardless of the challenge or the combination of challenges. This portable equipment will be staged at different parts of the plant and facilities grounds, so there are redundant pieces that can be sheltered from extreme events such as flooding and earthquakes. Even if one or two pieces are damaged by an event, there are diverse pieces available, and in the unlikely event that the primary systems and our backup systems are unavailable. All, again, to prevent fuel damage. We have been working with the industry and the NRC. We are confident this is the right direction. We are designing a system of backups to our backups to respond to an unknown event. We started buying equipment immediately following the event in Japan, and to date, over 400 major pieces of equipment have been bought, with additional equipment being ordered. The industry have reached agreement on the type of connectors to be utilized so that we could easily exchange and support each other. Flex is the major recommendation that will provide the majority of improvement in safety margins at the plant, the quickest from the Tier 1 recommendations of the NRC. It would add another layer of protection and make the plant safer. Next slide. We are acting now to improve safety margins of our unit and the ability to deal with catastrophic natural or man-made events. U.S. companies began procurement almost immediately following the events in Japan and have continued to add backup equipment to our installed emergency backup equipment. We are united as an industry on implementing these improvements, and our top responsibility is always to evaluate operational experience at any site in the U.S. and around the globe. We are dedicated to continuous learning and will apply these lessons here. We will not waver from this commitment as we move forward, and will deliver more electricity to meet growing demands. And then to conclude, we do not expect the action in Japan to have a major impact on new nuclear plant licensing in the U.S. I know I went through that pretty quickly, and I may have got into some technical discussion. If there are questions on from a technical matter, please feel free to ask for clarification on them. At this point, I'll open it up for questions.
Well, Joe, right now, we don't have any questions in the queue, but maybe one general question that may
Sure.
get some people thinking. There are, nuclear power plants in seismic zones here in the United States. Are there any key indicators from lessons learned from the Fukushima response that are applied to plants in seismic zones here in the United States in case they experience an event? What are some of those protocols maybe that you could walk through?
Sure. As far as the seismic events and the plants in the U.S., the one thing we have learned that the plants have been built with a great deal of margin, in particular in the seismic area. If you look at the events in Japan, in fact, the plants survived the seismic event and were safely shut down following that, and we're working on emergency backup power. It was a subsequent tsunami that took them out. And worldwide, there's been seismic events in nuclear power plants that have not caused any substantive damage to the safety systems. And in fact, in the August earthquake last year at the North Anna station, the seismic activity was greater than the design basis, but there was no damage observed at the facility of any of the safety-related equipment. In fact, there was minimal damage found anywhere in the plant. And that was, when I say minimal, it was one support that they identified it on a non-safety related piece of equipment in the plant. So the designs have been from the U.S. and the utilities when they were made had tremendous amount of margins in them, and they've proved out that even though these events have been beyond what they were originally designed for, they've been robust enough to withstand those type of earthquakes.
Well, we do have a question that's coming. Thank you for that clarification, Joe. I appreciate it. Can you provide examples of the type of portable equipment that will be staged on site?
Sure. The examples are our pumps with a capacity that would be able to inject into the pressurized water reactor steam generators that remove heat from the reactor, diesel generators that would provide backup power to motors, the specific safety motors, additional instrumentation hookups that will allow us to go in, for instance, the power generator, small power generators to be able to keep communication equipment powered up so that one of the radio and communications would not be without power in the event. So generally, in the big picture, it's electrical generators and pumps with a capacity to make up for installed pumps if they were unavailable for some reason, and also give them the ability to pump from water sources directly without, if you were in a flooding type situation where your river water pumps or lake pumps or ocean pumps were underwater, you would be able to put a temporary pump in there and take a suction that way.
Okay. Well, we do have another question that's come in. Let's see here. Let me read here. The speaker mentioned that spent fuel at Fukushima remained covered by the water, but clearly the loss of water from cooling was a credible threat that the industry and the NRC considered likely. Are nuclear plants in the U.S. taking any action to remove spent fuel from storage pools on an expedited schedule?
At this point in time, we have not pushed it into an expedited schedule. The fuel pools have been proven to be a very safe storage location for them. Plants across the country have been removing fuel and putting them into dry cask storage, and I think there'll be some discussions in the next part of the presentation on where we are in the U.S. with our fuel storage capabilities. But at this point in time, although it sounds like a very quick solution, it really isn't when you look at what's required to be able to put this fuel in dry cask storage. So we're not looking to expedite that at this point, but we are looking to put backup cooling features and make up water capacities for the spent fuel pools in the event of some type of natural phenomenon or other event.
Okay. Well, we don't have any other questions in the queue, but if folks have any additional, please send them along if they're directed for Joe, and we'll be happy to get it to them after Marshall's presentation. And I guess we'll go ahead and turn it over to Marshall.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much on behalf of NEI for joining in, and we always appreciate the opportunity to provide information. It's something that's very important to us to make sure that folks like yourselves and various policy levels and organizations understand what's going on with nuclear and that your questions get answered. So I hope that as we go through some more, you will come up with additional questions, both for Joe and myself and for the industry. I'm going to take it way back up to a very general overview of what's going on, where nuclear is in this country right now, and then focus some specificity on the used fuel, or some people call it nuclear waste issue. So with that, if we could have the next slide, please. So this is just some general data on nuclear in the United States. There are 104 operating reactors. There are 5 plants now being constructed in the United States, 2 in Georgia, 2 in South Carolina, and 1 that's kind of restarted construction by Tennessee Valley Authority in Tennessee. And so those 5 are expected to be operating by 2017, and they've all received their licenses after a thorough process by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to construct and operate. You can see there, those 104 reactors are at 65 sites in 31 states, provide a lot of electricity to the United States, and divide up by pressurized water reactors, boiling water reactors, some vendors, and 80 different designs. And that's an interesting statistic, because that comes from the 1960s, literally, up through just recently. But today, no one is going to be able to build a new reactor without a design that has been certified by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And there's been 1 design certified, 1 new design certified, with a lot of new safety systems that I'm sure Joe can talk about if necessary. And we expect 3 or 4 more designs, but there will not be, the next generation of reactors will not have 80 different designs. That's very clear. And that will allow for a lot of efficiencies and shared knowledge and understanding in construction and costs and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. So you can see what the number of kilowatts. So there's a lot of electricity. Average capacity factor, 89%. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this and show you the growth of that over the last 30 years or so, something that the industry is very proud of. We provide consistently 19 to 20% of the U.S. electricity supply, and our first quartile capacity factor was at 96%. These plants are running constantly. I was anecdotally in Scottsdale, Arizona, last Thursday and Friday, where it was 110 degrees, and the 3 nuclear reactors just outside of Phoenix were running all out and just meeting that kind of electricity demand they have out there. Next slide, please. So you can see it was a comparison chart here, or a pie graph, of the sources of electricity for the United States. Coal, 42.2%. That's down. Used to be 50, 55%, maybe more. Natural gas has been rising. The price of natural gas is very, very low. It's also very volatile, but it's very low, and that has encouraged a lot of new energy sources to come on from natural gas. Nuclear at 19.2, and you can see renewables, hydro. They tell me there's not much more hydro capacity in the U.S., so that's probably going to be fairly consistent. And then renewables, as I said. And there's some other data in there that you can see with respect to emissions and capacity factors and things like that. And most all this information comes from the Government Energy Information Administration here in Washington. Next slide, please. This is just a map of where all the existing reactors are, and some indication of where some new ones have been proposed. In addition to the 5 that are being built, there are a number of other utilities that have on the board some plans for new reactors, but as they look at market economics, the price of gas, energy demand, and things like that, they make those decisions with all that being considered. So while we'll have 5 or so by 2017, the next group that comes on may not be on until 2020, 2022, or so forth. China, by the way, is building at least 30, some people say 34 new reactors. Worldwide, there's, I think, maybe as many as 100 new reactors or so getting underway compared to what the U.S. is doing. Next slide, please. States have done a lot with respect and have a lot of interest in policies on nuclear reactors. A number of states have adopted financing mechanisms to help nuclear. The cost of the 2 new reactors in Georgia is $1 to $2 billion with a B dollars less than it otherwise would have been because of some state policies that have been of enormous assistance, and that will come back to help ratepayers in the long run because those reactors will operate. They'll be licensed for 40, but everybody's pretty confident that they'll run for 60, maybe even more years. Other states look at issues with respect to permitting. Some other states today are looking at supporting the notion of small reactors, which is getting a lot of attention and will be coming along in the next 5 to 10 years. So states have a lot of interest. We work with a number of state policy groups, such as the National Conference of State Legislatures, which has issued reports on all kinds of energy sources with suggestions and ideas and discussion of state policies to support energy sources, and that would include nuclear. Next slide, please. This is our graph over the number of years, 30 or so on capacity factor, and you can see that back in 1980 it was under 60%. Now the capacity factor hits close to and occasionally above 90%. This is the equivalent of a whole bunch more reactors and electricity, and is a function of the improvements in technology and understanding of the technology and the ability of companies and plants to make improvements where they can continue operating at a much higher level. It used to take, for a refueling outage, it used to take most plants probably 12 weeks or more. That's been cut down substantially, and they are just able to run much higher level on a more frequent basis. So that is, that is something that's really important to us. The other thing that's happening is a number of plants are going through what we call uprates, which is getting more toothpaste out of the tube, and it's a process where they literally make some technical changes and can produce more electricity, and it's a process that's approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So capacity for the last decade has been very, very high and very consistent as we go along. Next slide, please. Of the 104 reactors operating in the country, 73 have received approval by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to run another 20 years beyond their original 40. 17 intend to do that, and there are 13 underway. So almost every reactor is finding the ability to continue to operate safely, approved by the NRC to run another 20 years, which is, we think, a pretty outstanding achievement. And next slide, please. Let me talk now about used fuel. 2 years ago, the Secretary of Energy appointed a Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future, charged with studying and reviewing and making recommendations for what to do with used nuclear fuel. It was a very, very prestigious bipartisan commission. You can see the chairs were former Congressman Lee Hamilton and General Brown Scowcroft, some other very prestigious people, including the individual who will be probably confirmed this week to be the chairman of the NRC, Dr. Allison McFarland, chair of the University of California, Berkeley Physics Department, Senator Pete Domenici, MIT professor, and a number of other folks. They went around the country for 2 years, held hearings, received testimony here in Washington and all over the country, did a lot of studies, had an extensive staff with experience, technical knowledge. And if you go to the next slide, thank you. You can see these are their 8 recommendations. That any siting of any facilities for handling or hosting or storing or disposing of used fuel has to be based on a consent process. There has to be community and state consent. They recommended basically taking the management of used fuel away from the Department of Energy and creating a new organization outside the department. They recommended access to the Nuclear Waste Fund, which all ratepayers from around this country have been paying into for many years. It's the money that has paid for what's going on with Yucca Mountain to date, but there still remains about $24 billion as of today in that fund. but it can't be used for anything but Yucca. Prompt efforts to look for repositories, and I'll get to Yucca in a couple minutes so you can see where that is. Prompt efforts on consolidated storage, we think that's very important. We think it's very doable and would help break the logjam on this issue to a certain extent, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Making sure that as we get into issues of transportation of used fuel, that there is a lot of effort of outreach and education for communities on that. Support for innovation and U.S. leadership as we do all this and looking at non-proliferation. So it's an extensive report. It's available on the Department of Energy website in detail, and they also have an executive summary that you can see. Next slide, please. A lot of organizations testified, provided information, and when the report came out, issued their support for these recommendations, including the National Association of Regulatory Commissioners, ourselves, Nuclear Waste Strategy Commission, American Public Power, the Rural Electric Co-ops, Edison Electric, and another one that's not on here that I wanted to mention was the National Conference of State Legislatures, which has a policy that is in support, especially of consolidated storage, and they've been very actively communicating directly with Congress on these recommendations and on that particular issue. Next slide, please. So we all are supporting these priority recommendations. We think 3 of them have most import, enabling access to the waste fund, moving forward with consolidated storage, and creating a new management entity. Clearly a disposal program, be it Yucca Mountain or something else, is necessary. But again, let me talk about that in a couple of minutes. Next slide, please. This is where used fuel is right now. It's at basically every reactor site, either in the pool or on dry casks outside the pool on the site, or in both situations, and some other facilities. There's about 10 shut-down nuclear plants in the country that have a significant number of used fuel. Most of these plants have been decommissioned. They've been cleaned up. There's nothing there but a concrete pad with the storage casks, and the states that have those facilities would like very much to create a facility where they can be moved those casks to, and so they can finish cleaning it up. And I've been to some of these sites, and they're in nice locations, and the states would like to get back to what they can do with it, but they need to shut down the fuel site, which has not been possible and won't be until a facility is built. Next slide. Can we move this fuel? Yeah, if we were able to get a consolidated storage facility, which is basically a concrete parking lot for big casks, that would be licensed by the NRC, could be open by 2020, maybe even earlier. Yucca Mountain, if we started today, if we restarted Yucca Mountain today, you'd still be 20 or 30 years away from having that facility able to accept fuel. There's already more fuel out there than Yucca Mountain was designed for, so you have those kinds of issues. And any process to identify an alternative repository location would be a multi-year process just involved in getting consent and support and all kinds of geological testing and so forth. So short term, again, it comes back to what the Blue Ribbon Commission said and what all these organizations are saying, and what we believe is a smart move, an important move, is to work towards consolidated storage facility. Next slide, please. And that facility would be similar to, if any of you had a chance to visit a reactor site, you may have seen the casks stored somewhere on site or very close to the site. That's what it would be. It would be bigger. It would be licensed by the NRC. Could be open 5 to 10 years. It's not a complicated entity or facility. There are really no moving parts. It just keeps and maintains all the casks that you can put there, and you can build it small and continue to expand. You can also, demonstrate clearly to the country that a facility like that is very much viable and that you can move used fuel. And if you go to the next slide, this is what these casks look like. One version of them is about 3 or 4 different designs, all again approved by the NRC. I'd say they're 110 to 125 ton casks, so they don't tip over very easily. Very, very robust. If an airplane hits them, the airplane is going to disintegrate, and they're designed to fall over or sit there through fire with nothing getting in. Everything inside that cask is a solid material. The fuel rods are solid material. They're not gas. They're not liquid. You can stand next to them. If you show the next slide, which is, I think it was up from Minnesota in the snow, and you can, stand next to these casks and walk around them, and they're monitored, and nothing goes on. It's quite safe. Next slide, please. So what's going on right now is in Washington on used fuel and these issues, the Senate Appropriations bill for energy and water has language in it that would open the door to the Department of Energy moving forward with consolidated storage, and it would direct the Secretary of Energy to reach agreement with states and communities who are interested to start a pilot project and begin to move the shutdown plant fuel to a built and licensed storage facility. That language was put in by 4 senators, Alexander, Feinstein, Murkowski, and Bingaman, supported unanimously in the Energy and Water Subcommittee and unanimously by the full Senate Energy Committee, and it's in their appropriations bill awaiting floor action. If you go to the next slide, please. That kind of summarizes what I said about the things that it will cover, so we can move on to the next slide. People always ask, are there really communities interested? The answer is from our perspective, yes. Some have been very public about it. Others are just taking a look at it. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in Baltimore on this issue, and there were representatives from 7 states that were there who are all interested. Again, some have been very public. Some are just trying to understand what it's about and taking it back to their states to look around. There are communities that are interested. There would be, under the Senate language, and most people feel there would be community incentives and a flow of economic benefits to these communities for them to be able to do it. Next slide. This was a newspaper headline from Hobbs, New Mexico, which is in southeast New Mexico, where there is already a nuclear waste facility called the Waste Isolation Pilot Project, or WIP, which has been operating very successfully for almost 15 years with no incidents, and it takes defense waste that moves across the country and is deposited into basically salt caverns. And salt is a mechanism that will grow on and over and close in the barrels of nuclear waste that are stored at the WIP facility. So this is a nearby community which has said publicly, and they've said it in Washington, they've said it in the state capitol, and they've said it around their community, that they're very much interested in being the host of a storage facility because they think it will, they feel comfortable, it'll be safe, and they feel they'll get good economic benefits from it. And finally, one last slide. Here's Yucca Mountain. The House Energy Appropriations Bill does not have any of the consolidated storage language. The House bill has money in it to restart the licensing process for Yucca Mountain. It will money for the Department of Energy and money for the NRC to both pick up and keep going. Nuclear waste is very political. We're not sure what will happen, whether in a conference committee those 2 concepts of one on storage in the Senate, one on Yucca Mountain in the House, whether there's middle ground that can be found that's acceptable. We would certainly like to see such a thing happen. We think that it makes sense to continue licensing Yucca Mountain because of all the learning that would come out of it, if nothing else. And obviously, we have felt for a long time Yucca Mountain was a good project to bring on. But there is a lot of politics around it, so we're not sure yet whether that will happen. So not much more I can say about that, but happy to try and answer questions. So that's kind of where the used fuel is. As I said, a lot of organizations around the country. I mentioned NCSL and NARUC and individual governors, a bunch of elected minority official organizations have been communicating support for the Blue Ribbon Commission to Congress, so it's getting a lot of attention, and I put my plug in. I would certainly encourage CSG take a look at the issue and see whether there's some value in learning more and maybe indicating a position or not. It is getting more attention now to some practical solutions for used fuel than just a battle back and forth about Yucca Mountain. And so we're happy to see that. We think the Commission did a very good, thorough job, and we'd like to see Congress make some moves here over the next 2 years to bring some of that to reality. So that's that presentation. Again, we're happy to answer questions on any of this or anything we haven't even talked about with respect to nuclear, because there are other things, new technologies, small reactors, emergency preparedness, whatever folks may be interested in. And again, thank you very much on our part for your interest.
Well, we do have a series of questions here, and I'm not sure who would be the best person, Mini I, for this one, Marshall, but I'll go ahead and give it to you and let you guys figure out who would be the most appropriate. Has there been any movement in reprocessing spent fuel, leveraging technology at Savannah River or other MOX projects?
There's a lot of answers to that, but I'm going to let Joe take it. There's been no movement from a standpoint of the U.S. moving towards reprocessing. As you're well aware, the U.S. has been reprocessing naval fuel for years in Savannah River, but the non-proliferation has to get past that from the 80s, which said we wouldn't do reprocessing. That is another alternative that we did not discuss as far as storage of fuel, which would reduce the footprint of the fuel repository, obviously. But no, there's nothing active at this point in time.
Which is, let me add on top of that, which is one of the reasons we think a storage facility has some value, because as actually, I think it was Dr. Allison McFarland, the new NRC chair, when she was on the Commission, she indicated support for a storage facility, and her term, I think she used, was it would give us a breathing space while we figure out, are we going to reprocess? Country should really make a decision one way or the other. Is there a technology that's acceptable that meets proliferation concerns but would enable us to reuse the fuel? And that changes the nature of what ultimately you need for final repository, which means what that final repository is or looks like or where it is changes. But if you have a storage facility, which would be licensed probably for 40 years and could maybe go longer, while you figure this out, that could be a good thing to do, because any reprocessing facility, I think, is going to take a long time and a lot of money. Even if you were to use the facilities and the technology that the French use, and they're very successful at it, but their technology is not really acceptable here on proliferation reasons. So it would take a long time. That's why we think the idea of a storage facility coming up soon would be good.
Okay. Our next question is, what is the status of the proposed plant in Idaho?
To my knowledge, Areva, this is the enrichment plant I presume you're talking about, that is kind of on hold from the perspective of Areva. It'd be better to get a direct answer from them, but my understanding is I think that it's still being planned but not being moved right now. There is a similar enrichment plant in southeast New Mexico with the same centrifuge technology.
Okay, and we may have to skip back a few slides here for this next question. So there's one slide showing state policy. It showed 2 to 3 states in blue. What does that indicate? I guess that was on the legislation slide?
Yeah, I don't know what states they were.
Right, yeah, I think that may have been it right there. Louisiana and Maryland.
Maryland is on there. It's because there was some interest in Maryland in new reactors. Louisiana, oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I actually don't know, and I apologize for that. I'll find out why those states are in blue. Maybe that there were, when this slide was put together, maybe that there was some, they were under some consideration for some legislation that was just being discussed and not acted upon.
Sure, sure. Okay. And we have the next question is back to Yucca. Sorry, I'll give you a heads up here. We've got a scatter shot here of different interests. Is Yucca a technically feasible site?
In some respects, the answer depends on who you ask. Some people say yes, some people say no. Part of what the licensing process would do would enable that question to get thoroughly examined, looked at, studied. Those who think it's not would have their opportunity through intervening in the process to make their case, and those who think it is would have the opportunity to make its case. But the licensing process, because it's come to a halt, doesn't let us go far enough to really understand. There's a lot. Some people said it's the most studied thing in the history of the planet, and you know, millions of pages, literally, of scientific and technical stuff. And I can ask my two colleagues here if they want to chime in on that at all. But
no, I think that the answer he just gave is it. I mean, obviously it was thought to be a feasible location when it was selected. It's gone through the licensing process, and that licensing process is the process we use in the U.S. to make that final determination. And it hasn't got far enough in that process to say yay or nay.
Yeah.
Okay. This one is back to the Blue Ribbon panel and also reprocessing as well. What does the Blue Ribbon Commission say about reprocessing?
They didn't say a lot. They focused a lot on repository, on storage, on the management of the program, transportation, finances, and things like that. They did not get into a lot of detail and didn't really make a recommendation to go yes or no.
Okay, and this one's back to Fukushima and emergency planning. In light of the Fukushima incident, is there any discussion about re-examining the size of emergency planning zones in the U.S.?
I'm going to have Sue Perkins-Grew, who's a member of our team and our lead on emergency planning, who's sitting right here, answer that.
Hi, good afternoon. If you're familiar with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's near-term task force report, one of their recommendations that I think is in the what the NRC categorized Tier 3 or Recommendation 11, I believe, is to take a look at the technical basis. But from all the research we've done so far, there is nothing that we've learned from Fukushima that would take into question the basis for our current emergency planning configuration that's outlined in New Reg 0396, which provides the original technical basis.
And we still have a few more minutes for questions for people who have others who'd like to send in. But one general question, I wanted to get back to your presentation, Marshall, when you showed the disparity of where nuclear fuel is in the country, and that the nuclear waste fund is up to $24 billion or so. Maybe for people on the call who aren't as familiar with that fund, maybe explain a little bit about where that money comes from and maybe potential uses of it, that where it could go. And I know there's been some interest in Congress about refunding that money back to the state or the utilities who've had to collect that money. But what are some different policy options out there? And maybe just you could tease out a little bit more about how that fund came to be and why it's sitting where it is.
Yeah, I think it was created by the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, which set out the determination to identify a repository and the steps to be taken for that, and the funding to create the repository. It's basically everybody, virtually everybody who pays an electric bill in this country, there's a small charge included in that electric bill that pays for the fund. So we can provide you with a slide or a chart that shows how much the ratepayers of every state in the country have paid in to date, and most of them, it's hundreds of millions of dollars, to be used to support and build, construct, operate Yucca Mountain. It has reached as high, it has about $35 billion, I think about 10 or so has been spent to date on the Yucca Mountain project. We believe it's important, and I think the Blue Ribbon Commission certainly discussed this, to not have that fund be limited to just a repository, but the cost of a storage facility, for example, would be very small compared to that kind of repository, and you could easily fund the repository from those monies. One of the interesting things that's happening right now is because the Department of Energy has not lived up to its legal responsibility to pick up used fuel at all those sites on that map, and they were supposed to pick it up by, I think, July 1st, 1998, a little late. They have been sued by a number of utilities, and a number of utilities have won hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in fees and fines and rebates because DOE hasn't picked it up. That money has not come from the waste fund. That money has come from the general fund supported by all taxpayers because of the way the system is set up and the way the Department of Justice, which has to defend this, where it goes for what they call judgment fund to pay those settlements. Just about a month ago, 3 utilities in New England, all of which have shut down plants, they're not operating a reactor, they have casks, those type of casks I showed on 3 different sites. They just received $150 million of taxpayers' money from the Department of Justice on that kind of lawsuit. If we could get a storage facility built and operated, you could end that liability problem. And you could move those casks there, and you would not be paying out of that fund the money, and you would use the money from the waste fund. So it's very complicated sort of financing, and you have to change the federal law. But that is a recommendation the Blue Ribbon Commission made, and it's a recommendation that Senators Feinstein and Alexander and others are also talking about, because it's kind of, they see it as kind of an appalling situation here.
Well, thanks for providing clarity there. I don't see any more questions in the queue, but again, for our participants, thank you for calling in. If you have additional questions that you would like to submit, please feel free to send them to me. I'm Bryden Ross. My email is bross@csg.org, or feel free to reach out directly to our panelists today at NEI. I'm happy to get you in touch with their contact information. It's on the presentations as well and on our Knowledge Center. And I want to remind all the participants that we will be sending a link to the presentation, and we'll have a summary write-up, and the presentation will be online shortly for you to review.
Brian,
yes,
this is Marshall.
please,
If I might, just one last thing, and our thanks to everybody for their interest. Our website, we probably should have had a slide with our website, and I apologize for that, but it's very simple. It's nei.org, and there's an awful lot of information there that goes behind all of this and more. And as you said, we're most happy to entertain questions, provide more paper than people want or more electronic documents than you want. But we're happy to do that, and we appreciate the opportunity to do it. So thank you.
No, of course. No, thank you for giving your time today. And if there's do you have any other closing thoughts y'all would like to share?
I think we're good. We look forward to working more with you guys on some of these issues and communicating with some of your committees and things.
Okay. Thank you very much. And again, thanks everyone for participating today, and have a good afternoon.